kufunga pingu. Ikafika saa 8 ndio akaanza kupiga risasi ndani.
Pigwa risasi zile za ukanda.
Nikinyamazishwa kama siwezi tena kuzungumza, nitakuwa na udhuru kwa Allah.
These are dead bodies. This one is dead. Dead bodies.
In the evolution of a public's understanding of terrorism, there is almost always one significant event. One so shocking that it destroys the notion that the public lives on an island of peace. Or that a war fought far away won't have victims at home. One that moves leaders to action.
If they want to fight, they should go and look for soldiers, not to come and target people who are just enjoying themselves.
This government is going to be very firm on those issues that are terrorism related.
East Africa has witnessed all of these events on its soil. But before the event, there's the build-up.
A number of people have lost their lives. Their dear lives.
An unseen or misread build-up that many often take for granted. The build-up for nearly all terrorist attacks in East Africa began years before either Kenyans, Ugandans or Tanzanians knew what terrorism was. It began in Somalia. In 1991, the Siad Barre regime, one of the most militarily powerful regimes in the Horn of Africa region, fell. Before long, the Somali army's arsenal had been spirited to all corners of this expansive nation, in the hands of clan warlords or anyone who could get their hands on them. Soon, Mogadishu, once called the Rome of Africa, and most of the country would descend into episode after episode of violence. A United Nations peacekeeping effort ended with the bloodying of its heaviest underwriter, the United States' nose, in an episode that remains in infamy, Black Hawk Down.
My fellow Americans, today I want to talk with you about our nation's military involvement in Somalia.
The US would pull out its troops, and for nearly a decade, the world would forget Somalia. But the name of the country would live on, especially in the growth of the East African terror matrix. The first culprit named in the 1998 bombing of the US embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam was Osama bin Laden, a Saudi national whose enmity focused on the United States, a nation he called the Great Satan. But far beneath Osama bin Laden in Al-Qaeda was a man whose face would become synonymous with terrorism in the region. And he was of far more local extraction, Mohammed Abdullah Fazul. Born in the Comoros Islands, he would grow up in the region. According to intelligence released after the blast, he would procure the implements needed to carry out the 1998 terror attacks from two nations, Yemen and Somalia. He was the head of Al-Qaeda operations in the region and, predictably, the head of the terror matrix that the anti-terrorism police unit now seeks to destroy. And for the first time, Kenyans would also come to hear of the term rendition, meaning the illegal transfer of an individual from one jurisdiction to another in relation to the so-called War on Terror. The first Kenyan to have been renditioned because of terrorism was Mohammed Ode. Ode's original home state was Palestine, but he became a naturalized Kenyan after marrying Lamu native Nasim Nassor.
Alikuwa anafanya ni businessman, anafanya kazi ya kuuza samaki, lobsters. Alikuwa akienda Kiunga, saa nyingine akitoka kidogo akiingia pia Somalia, akichukua samaki, lobsters, akija kisupply kwa mahoteli hapa na pia baadhi ya soko nyingine.
According to US intelligence though, he had been hired to train troops loyal to Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid, after which he received money to begin a fish trawling business in Kenya.
Ikabidi apambane na baadhi ya rafiki zake wengine, wakamshaji, wakampa moyo ili waotoke kidogo waende wakatafute biashara. Sasa kurudi kutoka Nairobi ikawa trip yetu imechange, ikawa mimi nibakie hapa, tusirudi tena kwanza Witu. Ndio ikabidi asafiri. Ilikuwa ni hope after 2 weeks hivi atarudi. Kusafiri kufika Karachi ndo hapo akashikwa.
And in Karachi, Pakistan, while traveling on a fake passport, he was questioned and returned to Kenya. Nasim, 5 months pregnant with their second child, heard of the news of his arrest on the radio.
Sikufikiria kama kitu itakuwa kubwa sana hivi. Kwa hiyo wakati huo nilikuwa ni mjamzito, niko na miezi 5. Na huyo alikuwa ana mwaka na miezi. Sasa usiku wa hiyo usiku tuliona habari kama saa 10 ya usiku tukajiliwa na ma FBI's na CIDs wa Kenya.
She would not get to see her husband. A week later, he was transferred to the United States, and 3 years later was sentenced to life imprisonment for his alleged role in the 1998 bombings. Nasim's knowledge of the charges against him come mainly from the press, his letters to her, and a lawyer who once visited Kenya to interview her. Mohammed Ode would also be linked to Mohammed Fazul, who was still on the run in the region. Fazul would come into Kenya from time to time, visiting the island of Siu, even marrying there. But he maintained his ties with Al-Qaeda and was planning yet another terror attack, this time on the Paradise Hotel in Kikambala. It was after this attack that Fazul would be linked to slain Muslim cleric Sheikh Abud Rogo and Fazul's brother-in-law Mohammed Kubwa. Rogo and Kubwa would be linked to the bombing of the hotel and remanded for 3 years before being released on a lack of evidence. Somalia would be Fazul's main operational base until June the 8th, 2011, when he was killed while trying to escape a roadblock in Mogadishu. But Somalia isn't just the base from which the region's main terror targets would operate. Its recent history provides the background for East Africa's current war. In 2006, after nearly 2 decades of war, a clan-based religious outfit called the Islamic Courts Union would bring some semblance of peace to the nation. But coupled with fears that the union would foment the creation of an Islamist fundamentalist state in the region, fears spun mostly by the United States, and there actually being a fundamentalist breakaway wing of the union, the center would not hold. That wing was called the Harakat al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen, more widely known in the region as the Al-Shabaab. Quickly, the Al-Shabaab imposed itself on much of southern Somalia, but their influence would also be challenged a year after their breakaway from the Islamic Courts Union. In 2007, the first contingent of troops from an African Union-sponsored peacekeeping force landed in Mogadishu. What they found was a country on its knees. The Al-Shabaab was also at its strongest. One of AMISOM's heaviest losses was the ambushing and killing of 54 soldiers from the Burundi contingent. The Al-Shabaab touted this as a major victory. But then the tide would turn. After the change of its mandate and the expansion of troops to more than 17,000, AMISOM would be resurgent.
We have degraded them. If you consider 2007, they were literally everywhere in this country. But today, we can tell you they have been able to move into areas that we are not. But the areas that we are, only small elements who have infiltrated and trying to do, discourage our efforts.
After we have taken all their areas of where they have been relying on to get their revenue, you find there's only a rift in between because of the resources.
Looking around, it's difficult to see anything to celebrate. Pockmarks made in what seemed like an unending fight are everywhere you look. But Somalia's greatest victory in over 2 decades has been the forcing of the Al-Shabaab onto its back foot.
The Uruba Hotel was once one of Somalia's finest, but it fell under control of the Al-Shabaab up until 2010, when this tactical position was taken away from them by AMISOM forces. A year later, in October, the Kenya Defense Forces would march into Somalia under the auspices of Operation Linda Nchi, defending the country from a terrorist attack that seemed imminent. And the Al-Shabaab would now have one more military target at least, to face. But what are the tactical objectives of the Al-Shabaab in Kenya, and what tactics does the Al-Shabaab use in fighting its war against the KDF and Kenyan citizens within the country?
They are adapted asymmetrical warfare by choosing ambushes and IEDs. Of course, the vest, as already explained to you, becoming bombers.
Kenya has been the target of numerous grenade attacks since the beginning of Operation Linda Nchi. But the Al-Shabaab's use of asymmetrical warfare would be noted in a far deeper sense, west of Kenya. Saturday, July the 11th, 2010. This was the event that many Ugandans had dreaded. Striking right at the heart of Uganda's middle class, the impact of the attack reverberated right down to the core of Uganda's leadership.
If ever there's a city that breathes life from sunup to sunset, then it is Kampala. And one night in particular showed Ugandans off at their very best. That was July the 11th, 2010, when they were gathered at the Chadondo Rugby Club and the Ethiopian village in Kabalagala to watch the final of the Soccer World Cup. But their mirth was shattered in the most brutal way possible, a bomb attack that left scores dead. President Yoweri Museveni promised to go after the Al-Shabaab with renewed vigor, and in doing so, enlisted the help of Kenyan security forces. Together, Ugandan and Kenyan security forces would take things so far beyond the limit of the law as concerns renditions that highly placed individuals within the security apparatus tell us that in referring to renditions at that time, they would call them the fruits of a beautiful working relationship between Kenya and Uganda. For a time, Uganda became the melting pot for all of the sins under the umbrella of counter-terrorism. And in doing so, they also had the help, we are told, of the FBI.
If I remember the words of the Commander-in-Chief, the President, he said, probably we didn't have a real reason for us to go there. Now, they have invited me further.
Everyone fell down.
Killed.
I got the brother dead.
64 people.
Targeted. A shock for a country.
The Uganda-African Union.
But in the search for justice for the victims, the Kenyan National Intelligence Services and the Anti-Terrorism Police Unit would perpetrate serious injustices against its own citizens. The legacy of renditions gained steam. In the days after the blast, Ugandan officers recovered a suicide vest that did not detonate. Connected to it was a phone from which almost all of the information used to connect suspects to the bombings was drawn from.
If a SIM card was ever used in your phone and that SIM card is used in another phone connected to some suspected terrorists, that's the kind of evidence that formed the core.
The phone allegedly belonged to Isa Ahmed Luyima, one of the alleged central planners of the blast. 67 people would be arrested, but security forces would settle on a group of less than 15. This is an organogram drawn by the Ugandan police in 2010 that links all of the suspects in the Kampala bombings to that one phone. On it are 8 Kenyans who are currently all incarcerated in Uganda's Luzira prison. They would become central to the sins committed under the banner of the so-called war against terror. Not because they're innocent or guilty, that's yet to be proven by a court of law, but because of how they got to Uganda. Among them is Omar Awad, a man named as being the master planner of the Kampala bombings. The 37-year-old businessman, Omar Awad's sworn affidavit reads like something out of a movie. I was apprehended by 2 men who I later learned to be officers of the ATPU. I was handcuffed very tightly with my hands to the back. I was roughly pushed into a Subaru station wagon vehicle. As the car sped off, the ATPU officers who had apprehended me forced a thin sack-like hood over my head through which I could see very little. The car drove by the gates of State House in Nairobi and stopped by a security control point. While the vehicle was stationary, the then deputy of the ATPU, one Boniface Moneki, came out and my hood was lifted, and he identified me by saying, quote, "positive," end quote. Omar then recalls that his journey to his current country of incarceration would begin. He continues, "We stopped somewhere en route and my hood was removed. I was told by the ATPU officers who were pointing guns at me that they were going to finish me there. And then photographs were taken of me and my hood was placed back on and I was placed back inside the Land Cruiser. After hours of driving, the car stopped at the Kenya-Ugandan border in Malaba. In a transfer that took minutes, Omar Awadh was placed in the custody of Ugandan security officers. The journey to Kampala began. He would be transferred to this place, what was at the time the headquarters of Uganda's Rapid Response Unit in Kireka. One of the officers said, "Omar, look around. This is a military barracks. If you move, even to scratch yourself, we won't think twice about shooting you." Omar Awadh would be amongst the last of 10 people rendered from Kenya. All of them say they were renditioned from Kenya in a similar fashion as Omar. Consistently during that period, the Anti-Terrorism Police Unit, then headed by Nicholas Kamwende, denied that they had arrested or handed over most of the suspects. Sworn affidavits by officers from the Anti-Terrorism Police Unit confirm this denial. In Kenya, the Extradition Contiguous and Foreign Countries Act governs how a fugitive criminal ought to be handed over for trial to another country.
I want to tell you that any person who knows the legal procedures and the legal processes.
Hassan Kasinja is an Assistant Inspector General of Police and Uganda's current Director of Interpol and International Relations. He knows the process well and takes time to explain it to us.
Somebody commits a crime in Uganda, the police prepares a file, gives it to DPP. The DPP takes that matter to court. Court issues a warrant of arrest. DPP gets that warrant of arrest. He sends it to the Attorney General. He sends it to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It becomes diplomatic. The Uganda government, blah, 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 blah. Sends it to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Kenya. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kenya does the reverse of what happens in Uganda.
When we then ask him why this didn't happen in the case of the men renditioned to Uganda, in almost the same breath with which he explains the law of extradition, this was his answer.
Within the East African community, there is an agreement on how to hand over somebody who has committed a crime and runs to another country. That treaty binds East African states in absence of an extradition treaty between one country and another.
On the very day that we conducted this interview with Kasinja, a Kenyan court had awarded compensation of 40 million shillings to 10 people, 8 of them Kenyans, who had been rendered to Ethiopia in 2007. Part of Lady Justice Mombi Ngoge's ruling in the case stated, the arrest of the petitioners was, in the circumstances, arbitrary, unlawful, and unconstitutional, and in violation of their fundamental right against arbitrary arrest, guaranteed by Section 70 and 72 of the Constitution. Not only were the Kampala suspects renditioned, it was done so with the help of Ugandan security forces in Nairobi.
Uganda did not hijack anybody. Uganda did not kidnap anybody from any country. That's what I'm aware. No suspect of any crime within this, no suspect of this particular crime that we brought in and is in detention was kidnapped.
The Ugandan actively participated in the arrest. I've spoken to a number of officers both in the Ugandan police and in the Ugandan army. At least they actively participated. One, I know that they actively participated in the arrest of Idris Magondu. That was, I think he was arrested in Kawangware.
Despite this denial, a high-ranking Ugandan security official who was privy to the operations spoke to us off the record and confirmed that a number of the arrests were coordinated on the ground by Ugandan security officers.
Nobody should cheat you or tell you that this war won't be over tomorrow.
According to this official, the only Kenyan security officer who was clued in of the security official's activities was the then police commissioner, Matthew Etere.
I forwarded that request to the Attorney General so that he can then be able to tell the country why Kenyans have been treated in this manner and what steps will be taken to ensure that their rights are protected.
Because the renditions happened in such a public fashion, human rights activists had their ears pricked, listening out for any further injustices that could be perpetrated against the suspects. Kenyan human rights lawyer Alamin Kimathi went one step further. He went to Uganda to pursue the rendition with the Ugandan government. For 1 year, he wouldn't come back.
I was arrested in Uganda at the behest of the Kenyan government, the Kenyan Counterterrorism Agency, in conjunction with the American counterterrorism agencies.
Alamin was in for more than a year. Alamin is the one who gave me instructions. He came to Uganda around 2-3 times here, trying to find the progress on the progress we're making about those arrests. And therefore, I was very sure that Alamin could not have been guilty of any of these bombings.
Alamin was charged alongside Omar Awad and fingered as Al-Qaeda's East Africa propaganda man. Before long, it was evident that the charges wouldn't stick.
When you actually need to have a doctor look at you and subject, I say, I'm feeling good.
Alamin is still getting over the trauma of a year in a maximum security prison, but the perspective he gained from being in Luzira raises even more questions about the way the fight against terrorism is being conducted in the region.
Nobody wants to come out and say we were wrong, and that's the problem with this whole counterterrorism things. Nobody comes out and says no, we were not right.
What I've seen is that in most cases, when we do stories here, in Uganda or even elsewhere in Africa, we are following a narrative of somebody else who has done similar stories before. So you fall, I think they fell in the same trap of what happened in Afghanistan, in Yemen, where people were taken to Guantanamo. These renditions had happened before.
Another one of the suspects related his interrogation in Nairobi by security officials. But this individual's claims of his arrest and rendition epitomizes what is the height of injustice in the war on terror and involves the Kenyan Anti-Terrorism Police Unit, the Ugandan Rapid Response Unit, and America's Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI. That man is Habib Suleiman Njoroge. In the organogram connecting the Kampala suspects to the suicide vest that didn't detonate, Njoroge sits alongside Yahya Suleiman Budhia and beneath Hijar Suleiman Nyamadondo. The pair were alleged to have transported suicide vests to Uganda. All three men are said to have met prior to the bombings to discuss the strategy they would use to deploy the suicide vests. Nyamadondo, Yahya and Habib are all brothers. The 2011 UN Monitoring Group on Somalia and Eritrea's report to the Security Council erroneously states that Nyamadondo is Tanzanian. He's actually Kenyan. At the time of his arrest, Habib was a journalist working for Radio Salam in Mombasa. My colleague Mohammed Ali was an employee of Radio Salam between the years of 2006 and 2007, where he met and worked with Habib. Habib is alleged to have been arrested at the Malaba border as he tried to enter Uganda. We decided that it was worth interviewing Habib, but given the paranoia around the Kampala bombing suspects, we would not get our opportunity. We tried to do so through official channels, but to no avail. So I posed as a human rights lawyer who was interested in the case. Given the paranoia around the Kampala bombing suspects, we would not get our opportunity. We tried to do so through official channels, but to no avail. So I posed as a human rights lawyer who was interested in the case. I would create identification to this effect. We were informed that the prison warders at Luzira Maximum Security Prison were very particular about how visitors, especially those from the legal fraternity, dressed during the week. So I would need to look the part. Once inside, I would use a recording device to conduct the interview. First, I wanted to know the circumstances around Habib's arrest.
Nurdin nilipoingia Radio Salam nikampata Nurdin na wafanyakazi wengine wanne. Miongoni mwao kulikuwa na moja anaitwa Matano Muhammad, kulikuwa na Ibrahim Ngigi, kulikuwa na mwingine anaitwa Abdul Kadir Jailani, kulikuwa na mwingine anaitwa Abeid Msuri. Na Nurdin mwenyewe pia yeye alikuwa hapo. Nilipofika pale kazini akaniita kando Nurdin. Nurdin akaniambia, wewe unafuatilia hao ndugu zako, nimekwambia kutoka kitabu nilikuwa nikikwambia nataka utufanyie kazi NSIS. Nikamwambia no, mimi sisi nitafanya kazi NSIS, mimi not spy. Mimi ni journalist. Kumbe hii ilikuwa imeleta hatred. Kwa sababu gani? Nimekataa kuwafanya kazi. Sasa ndio pale akaniambia kwamba na wewe unatakikana na kina Rob na ATPU. Na akaniambia wewe hauna bahati wewe. Na hawa wenzako ambao tunawapeleka Uganda hamna bahati. Umenifahamu? Huko tunaenda kuwamaliza kabisa. Sababu gani? Alikuwa na uchungu kwa sababu nafuatilia ndugu zangu na nimekataa kuwa nikifanya kazi wapi katika NSIS hiyo muda wote. Sasa hii uchungu ndio imejengeka mpaka amenifanyia hivyo.
This is contrary to evidence presented by the ATPU. The Nurdin he mentions is Nurdin Haji, a senior officer at the National Intelligence Services. Apart from Habib's own words, there is no affidavit confirming that Habib was indeed arrested in Mombasa, but he alleges that there were witnesses to his arrest.
Kumbe tema ananichukua alikuwa ameshawasiliana na ATPU siki na Rob wale, akaniambia teremka chini. Akanipeleka chini, akaniambia wewe usijali, wewe tulia tu. Huku ananitishia maisha. Unifahamu? Akaniambia kama nitapata kuona familia yangu tena na vitu kama hivyo. Kuteremka pale mpaka ground floor pale. Kulikuwa pia na Sheikh mmoja anaitwa Hassan. Ni katika members of CIPK. Hassan alikuwa pale. Akaona nikishikwa, Hassan aliona nikishikwa. Muhammad Matano, mimi nashangaa. Waislamu nilikuwa na swali nao kina Muhammad Kadi kina Ibrahim Gige. Wanaona nikishikwa, akina Abeid Msumi, akina Abdul Kadir Jailani, wanaona nikishikwa, wanakataa kusaini affidavit tu, lakini yote nimemwachia Mwenyezi Mungu.
Upon his arrest, he was transferred to Nairobi, where he was again interrogated and castigated for refusing to cooperate.
Mwende kwanza, kitu cha kwanza kufika pale aliniambia, vipi wewe ndugu zako hao unawafuatia nini? Hao ambao wameshikwa. Wewe tulikuwa tukikuandama kutufanyia kazi ATPU na NSIS, umekataa, unajifanya mjanja saa hizi. Huko ni nini? Akaniambia, inakuaje nyinyi Wakikuyu hapa hivi mmekuwa familia yote nyinyi ni Waislamu na unajifanya kutetea Uislamu? Nakwambia mimi natetea Uislamu gani? Mimi ni journalist. Mambo ya Kiislamu yakija katika radio mimi huyazungumza. Sasa je, uchungu ndo hapo mmepatia huu uchungu? Mmenisema hapo Kamwenje akatoa chuma. Akanigonga, akaniambia nikikosa kuitikia yale mambo ambayo wananiambia basi sina bahati. Huyo ni Kamwende.
In this interview, Habib alleges that amongst those present at the interrogation was a senior Ugandan security officer. This information correlates with what we had been told by yet another security officer in Uganda, a conversation of which we have kept an electronic recording. We will not reveal the officer's identity as he is a confidential source. Habib continues, but this time he makes a most shocking revelation.
Nurdin akaniambia, wewe unafuatilia hao ndugu zako, nimekwambia kutoka kitabu nilikuwa nikikwambia nataka utufanyie kazi NSIS. Akaniambia kwamba kwanza wewe hata nyinyi tutawapeleka Uganda afadhali. Hawa wengine wanaoringaringa hapa sio kina Budrogo. Hiyo time kina Budrogo hajauliwa. Kina Budrogo, kina Muhammad Kasim, kina Samir Khan. Anasema hawa tutawamaliza. Nyinyi hata mna bahati kidogo mnapelekwa Uganda. Hiyo ndio spiri nilikuja tukiwa hapa Luzira tukija kupata news ya kwamba kina Abu Drogo ameuawa. The same statement ambayo Nurdin aliniambia na Kamwenge aliniambia na kwamba atamaliza hawa watu, sikuona kitu ya ajabu. Nikaona nikakumbuka kumbe ile statement nikishikwa mimi ndio hiyo ambayo imefanyika kazi sasa akina Muhammad Kasim, akina Rogo, akina Samir Khan na vijana wengine sita. Anasema kwamba they are going to work kwa hawa vijana wengi. Kuna vijana wengi ambao wameshikwa.
We asked Nurdin to respond to the allegations made by Habib in the video. He did respond. Through his lawyer, Desterio Oyatsi of Shapley and Barrett, Nurdin declined to answer our questions, stating that as a covert agent of the NIS, there are aspects of his job that are protected by law. We specifically wanted his responses to whether he was complicit in the commission of an offense, rendition. There is no law that protects any citizen from prosecution in the case that they do commit a criminal or civil offense, even if it is in the course of doing their jobs. Habib's interrogation happened almost 2 years before the murders of Sheikh Abu Drogo, Sheikh Samir Khan, and the disappearance of Mohammed Qasim. But the threads that ran through the contents of Habib's interview and the affidavits we have read is the participation of more than one security agency, including America's FBI.
Wananiletea picha, wananilazimisha kusema kujua picha ambazo mimi sizifahamu. Wananilazimisha mambo ambayo mimi siyafahamu. Wananilazimisha kuniambia kwamba wewe tunakupeleka kule na tukikufikisha kule lazima ukubali, la sivyo wewe na familia yako tunakumaliza. Tunamaliza mpaka mke wako, mpaka mtoto wako. Na in fact wewe ukichelewa kusikia sisi tunakwambia hao ndugu zako Yahya na Nyamandondo tunaenda kuwamaliza. Maskini ndugu yangu aletwa hapa, FBI walimpiga. Jicho lile leo hii jicho la ndugu yangu linaoza kwa yale mabaya ambayo hawa ndugu zangu, mabaya ambayo FBI ilimfanyia, kumpiga, kioo kikavunjika cha miwani, macho ikabidi macho imefura, jicho hili la kushoto limefura, linaoza.
The American Federal Bureau of Investigation's involvement in the interrogation of suspects in Uganda has been denied by the Ugandan government, but nearly all of the affidavits of the accused, as well as the information from the security officer, tell a different story. At least 4 of the suspects say they were interrogated by one or all of 3 individuals whom they described. The 3 men identified themselves as John, Frank, and Ibrahim, and among the things they are alleged to have done speaks to the level of involvement of America in the dirty end of counter-terrorism operations.
I think within 24 hours of the bombings in Kampala, the US government sent its security agents here. They have been involved with prosecution, training, and assisting, and so on. They were in the thick of things. By the time these people were brought to Kampala, the US agents were already here. They were among the interrogators and so on. So they were heavily involved.
What did your client say about the manner in which the US agents conducted themselves during those interrogations?
The evidence we filed in the Constitutional Court is the evidence of gross human rights abuse by both the US and the United Kingdom intelligence officers. Torture, physical abuse, threats of execution, threats of rendition to other parts of the world.
The FBI gave us more capacity in order to make sure that all the nitty-gritty of evidence that was needed in order to be assembled and analyzed was done. And they had capacity to do that, and they helped us in doing that. But the lead agency was definitely the Uganda Police Force.
So they weren't involved in any interrogations?
No.
There were some Kenyans, there were some Ugandans, Tanzanians, few Tanzanians, and Ugandans, and also the Americans were involved in the interrogations. But the interrogation sessions that I attended were very brief. The initial interrogation actually did not allow advocates to attend.
Information sharing in investigations such as that of the Kampala blast is important and common. But the quality of information in this investigation is something that already is being called into question. This organogram was leaked to the press a few weeks into September 2010 when the last of the Kampala suspects was arrested. It was leaked by the NSIS, but note the similarity to the organogram based on phone records which were provided neither by Uganda nor Kenya.
That chart itself, they're not using it in evidence. They're not going to use it because it's just that. That would force NSIS agents to come and testify, which they wouldn't want to. They can't substantiate most of the claims there, apart from the names of the people.
How would you say the CIA came about procuring these kinds of records, given that the CIA is supposed to operate from America? Uganda or Kenya are not American jurisdictions.
I don't know, but I guess that they have a worldwide network.
But this isn't the first time that sharing of information on counter-terrorism wound up making both local and international security agencies look bad. This is Abdul Malik Mohamed Bajabu. He is now 43 years old. In 2007, he became the first and only Kenyan to date to be rendered to the United States and incarcerated at the infamous Guantanamo Bay Detention Center in Cuba. According to a declassified report written in 2007 by Admiral Mark Busby, who was then the commander of the Joint Task Force based at Guantanamo Bay, Abdul Malik was part of a trio called the Three Musketeers, which consisted of himself, Mohammed Fazul, the East African head of the Al-Qaeda operations, and senior Al-Qaeda operative Ali Naban. Abdul Malik is said to have filmed an attempt to bomb an Israeli plane that took off shortly after the bombing of the Kikambala Paradise Hotel and allegedly helped plan the attack. He is also said to have been trained in Somalia. At one point in early 1993, he is said to have listened to the preachings of Sheikh Ahmad Rogo at the Sakina Mosque in Majengo, Mombasa. Rogo, according to Busby's brief, had begun preaching jihad or holy war there. All this information Abdul Malik is said to have volunteered himself. Whereas Rogo and Abdul Malik's meeting cannot be ruled out, as according to both these men's backgrounds, they were at the Sakina Mosque around the same period. Neither Rogo's wife nor his best friend can recall them ever meeting.
He didn't know him. I don't think he knew him. I don't know if they knew each other, but I don't have any recollection that Abdul Rogo knew Abdul Malik. But he sympathized with him.
Hata simjui mimi huyo mtu. Hiyo jina yenyewe naanza kukusikia wewe.
The pairing of Abdul Malik with well-known terrorists, it would seem, would have made for a slam-dunk case against him, except for one thing. In the 6 years he has been incarcerated at Gitmo, he has never been charged. A lot of the evidence against him, it would seem, was circumstantial. He is part of a list of 46 indefinite detainees at Guantanamo Bay, a majority of whose cases were too weak to stand the test of courtroom scrutiny, but are, according to the United States government, too dangerous to release. A lot of the evidence against Abdul Malik was gathered by the National Intelligence Services. Time seems to have marched on without Abdul Malik, but there still are those who are struggling to have him released. like Mwajuma Rajab, Abdul Malik's older half-sister. She speaks with Abdul Malik, albeit rarely, through the Red Cross. She can't understand why her brother is still a prisoner away from his home.
Wao watangoja paka afe alafu atulete maiti, lakini hiyo maiti ikiletwa wao watazika, si hatutapokea maiti, si tunamtaka na Abdul Malik.
She receives the letters that Abdul Malik is able to send to his family. His wife, Faiza Mohammed, is a medical doctor and lives with his 3 children in Mogadishu. While in Mogadishu, our producer Qasim Mohammed called Faiza asking if we could interview her. In Somali, she responded, "It has been 6 years. My heart is heavy. I cannot talk about him. Please do me a favor. Pray for me. Pray for me. Pray for me." Abdul Malik claims that he has endured torture and may be amongst those Guantanamo Bay detainees who were force-fed as a result of their hunger strike, protesting against their indefinite detention. The Kenyan government has remained mum over Abdul Malik's case.
Mtamwambia Mungu ni mkubwa kwa yeye kurudi, kwa sababu nimepigana miaka 6, sijachoka na sitachoka mpaka nijue mwisho wake.
Abdul Malik's case is far from being the only case of the United States' controversial involvement in the East African region's counterterrorism campaign. Guantanamo Bay isn't the only detention camp they have that isn't on United States soil.
Villa Somalia is the seat of power in Somalia. This is where the president sits. But when it comes to the war on terror, it has acted as a gateway of sorts for the expression of other nations' agendas. And one of the more controversial ones is that of America's. We've been to the Ali Abdullah Airport after staying here for about a week and noticed the presence of a very controversial building there, one that has been reported to be a CIA-run prison.
On the far end of the Aden Abdullah Airport premises is this building. These are the first pictures of this prison. Manned by private security guards, it's off limits. Well-placed individuals within AMISOM tell us that prisoners from across the region have been brought here. It's not immediately clear whether anyone is being held there at this moment. The existence of this prison came to light first when an American investigative reporter, Jeremy Scahill, wrote about it in an article published by American newspaper The Nation. Because of its military role in so many places around the world, the United States military footprint is the biggest it has ever been. And with an economy that is struggling to recover from the financial crisis of 2008, America can barely afford to maintain boots on the ground in different parts of the world. President Barack Obama's policy on a drawdown of troops, which made part of his campaign pitch in both elections, couldn't have come at a better time.
I intend to engage Congress about the existing authorization to use military force, or AUMF, to determine how we can continue to fight terrorism without keeping America on a perpetual wartime footing.
That doesn't mean that the United States' influence will be absent in fighting terrorism globally. The East African region knows this well. Section 1206 is a law that approves U.S. funding of foreign governments for counterterrorism purposes. In the financial year 2011 to 2012, according to the Congressional Research Service's report prepared for members and committees of the United States Congress on April 19, 2013, Kenya received $12.1 million to fund local counterterrorism measures, including rebuilding of police helicopters and training. In the year 2013, Kenya has received $22.7 million for counterterrorism measures, nearly double what it received in 2011 to 2012, and the highest in Africa. Uganda received $4.9 million this year, but was the biggest recipient in 2011, getting $44.8 million towards fighting the Al-Shabaab in Somalia.
Kamata polepole.
Tuwapora vipi hapa? Musanga mbele, musanga mbele.
Mshange.
Futa kwenu vipi hapa?
Fighting terrorism in itself is not a bad thing, except Kenya's and the region's counter-terrorism agencies, it would appear, have taken their mandate far, far beyond the legal limit.
This kind of funding is funding that can even go to fund other activities which have some also some counter effects.
The murders of Sheikh Rogo, Sheikh Samir Khan, Said Mohammed, and a number of others flies in the face of the United States law on funding, the Leahy Law.
I believe that the ATPU is working with, financial resources from international community, including the United States. Recently, we got hold of the Leahy laws, which are American laws, stipulating that any entity outside the US that is accused of human rights violations should not get any kind of funding from the US government.
The law does have a back door. Funding may continue if it goes through US intelligence agencies. Of the many US agencies involved in counterterrorism, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, plays one of the biggest roles in global counterterrorism measures. We wrote to the United States Embassy in Nairobi requesting an interview with the ambassador to Kenya on the issue of counterterrorism. The Communications Department initially agreed, but insisted on getting a list of questions over and above the brief we had given them about what the subject of the interview was. The interview was scheduled for the 20th of August. After receiving our questions, they cancelled the interview, saying that the ambassador had an emergency appointment. They did not schedule the interview to another date. Also, the Kenyan government officially denies that human rights abuses have taken place on its soil, a question that I put to the man who recently became responsible for knowing whether such abuses are taking place, President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Could I start? Yeah.
All right.
My name is John Allen Namu. I'm a Special Projects Editor at KTN. To the question of allegations of abuses of human rights down at the coast, perpetrated specifically by the Anti-Terrorism Police Unit, I'd like to know whether you've heard of these allegations and what you are doing to ensure that there is some sort of mechanism to ensure that our security agencies work within the law and do their investigations while protecting civil rights of Kenyans.
Yes, there have been such rumors, but as you also know, we have had major terrorism threats. I have not had any confirmation of any abuse on human rights, save for allegations. This government is going to be very firm on those issues that are terrorism related. We have seen the damage that terrorism causes to our nation, and we will not in any way compromise the security of millions of innocent Kenyans who are being targeted by a specific view. But at the end of the day, that said and done, it must be done in a manner that conforms to the norms of normal human rights and to ensure that no abuses take place.
President Kenyatta may be new in office, but there are a growing list of atrocities that he cannot ignore. Like the case of Garissa resident Ibrahim Mohammed. Ibrahim's autopsy states that he died on the 18th of April 2013, over a week after the shooting to death of 10 people in a hotel in Garissa. The attack, one of a series of violent attacks, was linked to the Al-Shabaab. Ibrahim's body was found floating in a river near Kilimambogo Training College in Donyo Sabuk. His lungs were full of water. According to the autopsy, he drowned to death. 3 days earlier, he and his friend Dahir Abdiwahad were arrested from Abdiwahad's home and along with a number of other young men were taken to an undisclosed location and severely beaten. They were questioned over whether they were part of the Al-Shabaab. Abdiwahad noticed that Ibrahim was taking the beating particularly badly. In the course of the violent interrogation, Abdiwahad says that Ibrahim began vomiting. After the interrogation, They were taken back to the Garissa police station. Ibrahim was not amongst those dropped at the police station. The last time any one of the men who were interrogated that early morning saw Ibrahim alive, he was in the custody of police officers believed to be from the anti-terrorism police unit. The next time Abdi Wahad heard about Ibrahim, it was to be told that Ibrahim was dead. According to a medical examination that Abdi Wahad underwent, the injuries he sustained were consistent with those that left marks on the corpse of Ibrahim. With a growing number of faces lost to the grave in cases of extrajudicial executions, it's easy to forget that there actually is a legitimate reason to fight terrorism in Kenya and in the region. Hassan Osodo is or was one such reason. On the night of the 18th of May this year, from this apartment building in Nairobi's Githurai area, he would engage police in an 8-hour gunfight before he and his wife were killed. The police had been searching for Hassan since October 2011. He also went by the aliases Budalangi and Budapest. We visited the building a month after that night. It's obvious. The amount of firepower expended here could have as well been used in a small war. The pockmarks and holes from bullets that flew remain. The pothole from where police say that the grenade he lobbed at them landed hasn't yet been filled. The living room of Hassan's rental apartment has been badly patched up.
Vile nilisikia, vile niliona kwa maonyesho, niliona mwenye mtu na bibi yake wenye wamepigana na maaskari kwa masaa mengi, na sikujua kama ni mtoto wangu. Lakini vile kesho yake usubuhi nikiamka nikapata kijikaratasi chini ya mlango nikifagia. Sasa vile nilisoma hicho kijikaratasi kilikuwa kimeandikwa Buda tush tush.
Hassan's gunfight made for sensational reports for a few days that followed. But somewhere, quietly grieving, was his mother, Hamida Osawe. The ATPU would question her and a close friend and neighbor, Asha Mwajuma, days after the killing, when they went to claim Hassan's child, who miraculously survived the gunfight.
Maaskari wakiniuliza mambo yake, niliwaambia Hassan hakukuwa mbaya, na wao wakaniambia Hassan hakukuwa mwizi. Mimi nikawaambia, lakini vile sasa mlimuua ni gaidi. Ni sawa mbele ya Mwenyezi Mungu. Mungu ndiye anajua alikuwa mtu wa aina gani. Wakaniambia, madhe, hatujakwambia kwa ubaya, lakini mtoto wako alikuwa yani, wakajaribu kuniambia ati angesoma zaidi angekuwa mjanja sana, angekuwa mwerevu na angekubali kujisalimisha, hatungemuua, tungemwandika kazi. Mimi nikawauliza, sasa vile mlienda tu vita, angekubali kujisalimisha aje?
Hamida explains Hassan's background. He was a good boy, she said, very religious. As he grew, he would spend time at the Pumwani Riyadh Mosque. It was a far smaller mosque, pulled down and replaced by this one.
Mwalimu wao wa dini alikuwa Iman, sijui Ahmad Iman.
Lakini pepo ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lazima mutiwe kwenye mitihani, lazima mutingishwe kama vile Mwenyezi Mungu amethibitisha katika Qur'an. Takbir! Allahu Akbar!
Na CD zenye alikuwa akipenda kusikiza sana ni za Abdurogo. Nasikia alikuwa amependaga CD za Abdurogo.
Ndugu zangu Waislamu, haya ninayowaambia mimi si ya wazimu, ya wenye akili hayakuwasaidia, yamewatia katika unyonge tu. Haya yangu ya wazimu, hebu yashikeni miaka 2-3, muangalie mtakavyokuwa.
He drew inspiration from these radical teachings, and that eventually drove him and hundreds of young Kenyans across the border. Many of them came from Majengo in Nairobi. Thanks in no small part to Ahmad Imran, himself a former member of the Pumwani Riyadh Mosque's management.
Tumekuja kupigania dini ya Mwenyezi Mungu, kalima yake isimame iwe juu.
Hassan had further motivation to go to Somalia because he knew he would be well received.
Daga ndio msema kweli. Hii daga.
Wewe kama mama mzazi, unaona kama ni kweli alikuwa amejiingiza katika kikundi cha Al-Shabaab?
Mimi kwa kukataa kuniambia mahali yako, yani siku nini, lakini nilikuwa nimehisi kuwa Hassan ako upande wa hiyo. Hakuwa anajiita Al-Shabaab, yeye alikuwa anajiita Mujahideen. Alikuwa anasema Al-Shabaab, alijaribu kunifafanulia hiyo Al-Shabaab ni kijana barobaro. Lakini watu hawajuagi kuita. Watu sasa wanaita tu vijana wote Al-Shabaab. Wanaita Al-Shabaab, wanaita magaidi, wanaita majina zingine. Lakini alikuwa ananiambia mama, sisi ni Wajahideen. Sisi ni Wajahideen. Mujahideen ni mtu yule anafanya vile mtume alikuwa anafanya.
Youth have been indoctrinated to an extent that they believe seriously that, they have moved away from the definitions that they had of jihad in days gone by to a new definition, which almost starts covering almost every other perceived enemy.
It's widely believed that the opiate that brought many of the young men in Kenya across the border to Somalia to train to fight amongst the Al-Shabaab was money. And that was true for many of them, but for a select group of them, a devout group of Muslims, that wasn't the case. They were drawn in by the ideology and went back to Kenya thinking of themselves as Mujahideen. One of the cells was led by Elgiva Bwire, who is now serving a life sentence in Kamiti prison.
Elgiva Bwire shocked many a Kenyan when, after his arrest with multiple rounds of ammunition and well over 15 grenades, he admitted to being a member of the Al-Shabaab and coordinating the activities of a cell that crossed back into Kenya with him. According to information we received from a person known to Hassan Osodo, he was part of the cell. We were given 8 names of men linked to Bwire. Some of the men knew each other from Majengo in Nairobi. Others were from other parts of Kenya. Beneath Bwire was Hassan Osodo, Shaban Namusenda Makotse, and individuals going by the names Najimdin, Lukman, Musani, and Jamaldid. Much as Hamida admits that Hassan was part of the Al-Shabaab, she knows that a lot of people that Hassan knew are now missing, that the anti-terrorism police unit is perpetrating extrajudicial killings is well known.
I can't denounce my religion. I'm a Muslim forever. And that's my position.
The case of the disappearance of Sylvester Opio, also known as Musa Osodo, in April 2012, after eyewitnesses saw him being arrested on his way to Molo in the Rift Valley, is one that keeps her up at night.
Kuniuliza marafiki za Hassan, nitawaambia marafiki za Hassan. Marafiki wa Hassan, mmoja wao nikiwaambia, siku hizi simuonagi mtaani. Nilipotea na yeye. Wazazi wake hawakuwa Waislamu. Wanaliaga wakizunguka hii majengo mzima wakiongea. Wanaongelelea Waislamu. Waislamu ni watu wabaya, walipotea na mtoto wao. Naambiaga hao watu nilisikia kama yani nimekasirika na wao kwa sababu upande ya kulenga Waislamu. Juu sasa Osodo walimpoteza. Osodo alikuwa rafiki Hassan hivi. Hakupatikana ni yake, hajawahi julikaniwaga ako wapi na hayuko. Vijana wengine hapa watatu walisema wameenda Somali na wakarudi. Ni Al-Shabaab. Walitolewa sijui kwa gari wakienda Mombasa. hawajawahi julikaniwa mahali wako. Waliwacha mabibi, kila mwingine aliacha bibi yake akiwa na mimba, mwingine aliacha bibi yake akiwa na mtoto. Huyu mwenye mimba mpaka alishazaa, mpaka alishakaa eda sasa, jua juma hadi bwanake alipelekwa, hajawahi fuatilia. Niliwaambia au ndio marafiki za Hassan wenye nilikuwa najua. Lakini sasa mimi naona Mwenyezi Mungu amenidhairishia, Hassan akukubali kujisalimisha na alikubali kupambana na nyinyi mpaka mkamuua akakufa kwa njia yenye alikuwa anataka. Lakini sasa wale walipotezwa, haijulikani walipotezwa aje.
Musa Osodo was a librarian at the Pumwani Riyadh Mosque and a friend to Sheikh Aboud Rogo. In December 2011, the then police spokesman Eric Kiraithe issued his and Hussein Deritu's photograph claiming that they were Al-Shabaab combatants capable of causing harm to members of the public. They presented themselves to the police and were later released without charge. It is now feared that Osodo is dead.
Alichukuliwa barabarani akiwa anapeleka wasichana madrasa sehemu za Molo, na waliokuja kumchukua ni polisi, na polisi mkuu wa Nakuru amekubali kwamba Musa Opio ametekwa nyara.
Juzi nimeletewa ripoti, naambiwa wewe ni sister yake Ali, namwambia mimi ni sister yake Ali. Ali amefanyaje? Nafikiri Ali ameanguka na gari. Wananiambia Ali ameshikwa. Nikasikia nimewambia, ni mimi mwenyewe nikawajibu ameshikwa na watu wa aina gani? Ameshikiwa nini? Ati Ali ameshikwa na ma ATPU. Nikasema alhamdulillah. Mitiani inanifuata. Ali anashikwa, Ali anaga hata stories za jihadi, stories za nini, hajakuaga nazo. Saa hii ako kwa mikono ya watu. Watamfanyaje?
Ali Musadik is a son of Asha Mwajuma. At the time the police claimed that he was a member of the Al-Shabaab in October 2011, he was as shocked as everyone else. His mother also swears that he has never been to Somalia.
Walikuwa wanakazana sana nisalimishe kijana. Nikawambia kijana sina mawasiliano na yeye wala sijui pahali yuko. Na pengine nyinyi mnajua zaidi, mmemshika na mkampoteza.
Even in the case where a person admits that he or she is a member of the Al-Shabaab, the question remains, is that enough evidence to murder someone?
This is a beginning. It was just Aboud Rogo was the first. Now we have 3. And I'm sure they will increase. And this leads to more hatred of the government, leads to more acts or to more yearning for young people to do terrorist acts.
And many observers in the region now say security agents charged with fighting terrorists have lost the high moral ground since they use the same tactics that the people they are supposed to be fighting are said to be using. Because if justice cannot be guaranteed to suspects, how will the truth ever come out?
Hiyo time kina Aboud Rogo hajauliwa. Kina Aboud Rogo, kina Muhammad Kasim, kina Samir Han, anasema hawa tutawamaliza. Nyinyi hata mna bahati kidogo mnapelekwa Uganda.
And if fear becomes a currency with which the fight against terrorism is sold, then it runs a risk of making martyrs out of mortals and further fueling the terror that ought to be fought.
And they move away now from they redefine themselves, which is something that needs to scare us, because it's not going to end. It's a matter of faith. It's a new faith that's being achieved. I mean,
upande wangu niliona alikufa kwa njia ile alikuwa anaitaka. Mtoto wangu aliniambiaga, mama mimi siku ile nitapotea, usinitafute hata shuleni. Mimi niko upande wa Mwenyezi Mungu.
John Allen Namu, KTN, for The Inside Story.